I'm delighted to be joining you live from Helsinki, where some of us are here for Slush, which kicked off today with the Investor Day and the Founder Day. And then we are going to be doing the same panel tomorrow. So if you are here in Helsinki and fancy a free lunch, then come along and join us. I am Jenni Chance. I'm the author of a report that PwC published earlier this year about the challenges facing female founders when fundraising. And I'm joined by three really inspiring founders who are going to be introducing themselves in a couple of minutes. They are going to give us their insights into the challenges that they faced, but most importantly, we're going to get their recommendations about how they overcame them and successfully fundraised. I'm going to give some context, and if you'd like to read the full report, it's in the comments section in the chat. Put any questions that you've got, and I'll ask them to the panel towards the end of the session. We've got 30 minutes, and at the end, and this is an incentive to stay on, they'll be giving their one piece of advice to women who are in a similar situation who are fundraising. So stay on for those gems at the end. But to give some context, the horrible statistic that instigated this report was that 3% of VC funding in 2020 went to female-led businesses. We've tried to update that stat, but just the statistics out there. And in fact, the State of European Tech report that was published yesterday said that 7% of European funding in 2023, only 7% of it went to all female founding teams. But we didn't want to dwell on those statistics. So in this report, we wanted to get behind those statistics and understand what women were facing, but most importantly, how they'd overcome those challenges and give some hope and inspiration to other women who are going through it. So we spoke to 40 female founders in 25 different countries who'd raised from seed through to Series D. They're in a mix of founding teams. We definitely noticed some geographical differences. In some regions, way harder to raise than in others. But what really shone through, and I know you're going to get this from the founders that are about to introduce themselves, was the tenacity and resilience that they really showed, all of them. I was so impressed by how resilient these women were. And how successful and how they really wanted to change the world. So it's a great message. And with that, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over. So Esther, could you introduce yourself to everybody here and tell us about who you are, your business, and why you became a founder?
So I'm Esther O'Callaghan. I'm the founder of Hundo.xyz. We set up a virtual work experience and immersive learning platform to tackle structural systemic youth unemployment. Started in the UK, but obviously moving towards international markets as well. It was driven by the kind of 2 decades that I'd spent working in and around youth issues, and then particularly exacerbating moment when COVID created a 400% increase in youth unemployment rates virtually overnight. So I didn't actually set out to be a founder. I am already an entrepreneur. The last business that I had before Hundo was a record shop in Manchester when I was in my 20s. So it's been a very steep learning curve, but I think what I have learned is, like most founders and entrepreneurs, you're kind of obsessed about tackling a problem that you set out to solve. So I guess now I would say that, yes, I'm a founder now.
Thank you, Esther. Georgina, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hi there, I'm Georgina Kyriakoudes. I'm the CEO and founder of Aria Health. So Aria is a health data network, and we're all about getting patients access to their medical data, control of their medical data, having transparency over how their data is being used, and being part of that process. So, for example, where we see like medical researchers using our data, we're all about the patients being able to know about that, being able to even get rewards from that, be able to participate in more clinical trials and be really more engaged with their health and be an active part of healthcare innovation. Now, I started this, I started with PwC actually. That was my original journey, and I love working with PwC, but I realized that unlike Esther, saw that I did want to be a founder. I wanted to create something myself. I wanted to really put my hands in every piece of the business and take the full responsibility, which meant everything could go wrong and that would be my problem, or everything could go right and I would, feel that. And so it's sort of had it in my mind for many years. And then, there was a personal experience where a friend of mine went into hospital. She was in agonizing pain and they took more than 4 hours to try and find her medical information, and that delayed her care, and she was actually bleeding internally. She had an ectopic pregnancy and lost 3 liters of blood. And that was kind of the pivotal moment for me, that I was like, this is crazy. There's access to so much information. I can't get access to that, and I'm limited there. And so that's really what drew me to this. And I also did a master's in blockchain, and so I've been looking at technology, which is all about ownership of information. So that's where that combined. But I think another thing which pushed me into entrepreneurship and maybe made me make the leap was also after I got pregnant. And I was pregnant and I realized that I wanted a change in my career. Where I wasn't quite what I wanted. But knowing that I'm about to give birth, knowing that I'm about to become a mother, I was like, if I go into a new company, I know there's going to be expectations on me to work long hours, to, really prove myself, to give that extra mile. But I don't want to compromise what I want to do as a mother. And that really created a conflict in me and actually pushed me to say, you know what, it's not that I know I can work hard and be a mother, but I'm not sure I can do it in someone else's schedule. And that's where, the importance of flexibility. And that's where I said, being an entrepreneur is the only way that I genuinely thought of being able to give what I wanted to give to my career and my potential, and also achieve what I wanted as a mother.
Thank you, Georgina. And Alex, you've got a kind of dual identity on this live today. Tell us about yourself.
I feel like me and Georgina are kind of like swapsies, like started in PwC and kind of now a founder, and I'm the opposite, started as a founder and now in PwC. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Alex Ruhl. I'm currently the head of Immersive Technologies at PwC UK, where I'm getting to kind of be at the forefront of solving large kind of like problems and solving them with emerging technology solutions, essentially around virtual reality, augmented reality, blockchain, virtual world platforms, things like that. But let's rewind a little bit, shall we? I never really thought about being a founder. When I think about why I just kind of fell into it, I think it's because my parents had always owned their own businesses as I grew up. So I felt like almost for most people, the 9 to 5 is the default. For me, being your own boss was the default. So it never really occurred to me that I wanted to build a company. I just knew that I wanted to work for myself, and I kind of saw that as the only path, really. So went freelance in 2011, just before I graduated uni. Fast forward to 2016, and this, kind of hype around virtual reality was really popping off. I think at that time, Facebook, what it was called back then, now Meta, had just acquired Oculus, the largest virtual reality hardware provider in the world. There was this renewed sense of like excitement. Samsung had come out with a load, Disney had invested in a distribution kind of a platform that was dubbed to be like the Netflix of VR. And I saw that as not necessarily a white space. I just saw it as a really interesting field that kind of fit my natural skill set, which is storytelling with technology. So I started building out these kind of like applications, these experiences. And at the time was one of the only real companies in the UK doing that. So, just naturally kind of found myself in a position where I had to grow, had to set up, the limited company structure, had to kind of, start to think about the legalities and who I needed in order to supply, keep up with the demand. So very fortunate position to be in at that time. Went on to an accelerator program in 2018. I think it was the first accelerator in the UK specifically aimed at these emerging technology platforms like VR and AR. Got all the way through the accelerator program, which was where I kind of started to understand what it meant to be, a founder that raises money and kind of is VC backed. And at the time, I was kind of like, oh, fascinating. I could see my life splitting into these two different paths. Do I want to go down this route, raise this money, be committed to this idea for the next 10 years? Or do I actually just kind of want to carry on doing what I want to do? And, if I want to sack it all off tomorrow, fly to Jamaica, that's what I'll do. So I actually chose not to raise in the end. And lo and behold, 2 years later, 3 years later, ended up working with PwC as a supplier. on their virtual reality productions. So started working with Jeremy Dalton, who is now my US counterpart, who leads on immersive tech. He had set up the VR department back in that day. And from there, just kind of built. And when the opportunities came to kind of come in-house at PwC, I thought, I mean, you couldn't get more opposite from a startup life. But for me, it was a really exciting challenge to go from being, the slightly tiny cog, the slightly bigger cog in the small machine, to being a tiny cog in a huge machine that can potentially impact from the top, right, and help startups that are kind of solving problems in niche areas by going that kind of high-level broad strategy for clients all around the world. So that's my journey. Bit of a random one.
But interesting nonetheless, and you've all had really interesting reasons for becoming founders. And we call this Against the Odds, raising funding as an emerging tech founder. So you're definitely all beating the odds, given how awful they are. So question to each of you. Tell me about some of the challenges that you face as a female founder. And we debated the fact that we're saying female plus founder, why not just founder? But if you could just talk to the audience specifically about raising as a woman, and if you've got a male co-founder, as some of you have, then talk a bit about the differences there. So Georgina, this time I'll start with you.
It's been so I, very much, I think, like all of us, learning on the job. That's how it goes in this industry. And when I first sort of started raising, I went out there and learn as I went. And definitely what I experienced was that 95% of the investors that I spoke with were men. And at the early stage in a company, you don't have a lot in terms of evidence of the traction of your company. You have an idea, you have potential, you have, maybe some MVP created, you have something, but a lot of why an investor chooses to invest in you is you, and it's how they connect with you. And I mean, my opinion is, it is human nature to like people that are like you, and hence it is human nature that a man is going to connect more with a woman, not with another man. I mean, it depends on certain circumstances, but as a general rule, if you're turning up and you're having 95% of your conversations with men, there's less likelihood to connect. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the first 3 investors that we got were all female like associates that we had met and that we're connected with. It was only the women that happened to have moved us forward. And it's impossible. These things are like invisible barriers that you can never say quite why, but at the same time you have to look and say, well, if only 5% of the people I spoke to were women, and it was only the women that moved this forward, is that a coincidence? So it's, I think it's always a difficult one to pinpoint what has been just a normal founder experience. It's difficult to raise, and you're always learning. And it's my first venture, at least sort of like an entrepreneurial, but an outside venture. But and what is really the female role. So that's sort of been my experience, but it's definitely been a challenge.
Esther, do you want to tell us about your experiences?
So I'm battle hardened fundraiser now, but my experiences were not just specifically to do with gender, and that was something that became really apparent to me through the process. Actually, I have a male co-founder and a male tech co-founder who came in a year later, but predominantly it was me that did the pitching for the kind of running the business and building the tech. So so I was pitching, but some of my anecdotes were being told that I was a non-technical, non-STEM background founder, which I was like, well, tell me something I don't know. It's kind of STEM wasn't an acronym when I was at school. So that was some of and I left school at 16. So kind of free school meals kid, leave school at 16. You don't fit in alumni, with university funding, you just don't fit, so you've got the kind of glass ceiling, paper ceiling. I'm like, so that was tough. Some of the more amusing ones were around, when you're up against, I'm 43 now, and my son is 19, and some of my favorite moments were some young white guys who spent the first 20 minutes of the 30-minute call telling me how big their fund was. Basically young enough to be my son. So so there was that. I think I do think it's tough. It's just tough, like raising money, like just full stop. I think, you know, I have a lot of mates who are you know, male entrepreneurs, and they equally, you know, they have horror stories as well. I think for me, it's more just kind of, I think what's hard is like when you know that you have to be so much better, you know, your business has to be so much stronger. The questions that you get asked, the way that you get drilled on metrics and particular aspects of your business that you know that an all-male co-founder, predominantly white co-founding team just don't get, when you know statistically that even the funds that subscribe to impact and supporting women, female founders get worse term sheets than all male teams, even within those funds. For me, I'm a bit like, if someone is kind of upfront about the fact that they're biased and they don't really believe in you and don't think that you have the same ambition as your nearest male, you know, counterpart, I'm like, that's cool, you know, like whatever. It's the ones that kind of have the veneer of support that I actually find more insidious, you know, in terms of causing the problem. So yeah, and then obviously, you know, some of it is harder. You know, when you're up against it, you know, you're running a business as well as raising, and it's fundraising is full time. It's tough. And then the ones that are hard are things like when a colleague of yours sends a deck to a VC, and the first responses on WhatsApp is the founder hot. And that's the benchmark.
That's
of where
shocking.
So there's a, you know, there's a range. I think that, you know, it's kind of like you definitely, as much as you need resilience and grit, you need a hell of a sense of humor to be a founder in a venture capital world. So
I also think, you know, I mean, it's fascinating hearing, you know, both of you talk about that experience, because like I didn't even get to, you know, that far to even be, you know, drilling into term sheets and things like that. But the thing that strikes me is the first barrier is that I was so naive to the fund. I didn't even know what it meant to get VC funding. I didn't understand what that meant. That essentially, you know, people are like, oh, you know, there's so many easier ways to raise money. You could go to a bank, or you could, you know, you could kind of like pre-sell your product or whatever it is. I didn't even understand the difference. So when I started to realize the realities, and, you know, that essentially the way I boiled it down in my mind to, hang on a second. So VC is just me being really good at telling someone about my idea and then believing that I can pull that off. That is so wild. And I think more, you know, and especially founders that are first-time founders, especially founders that will not have exposure to people that have ever raised money like I did, you know, they need to know that. They need to almost understand how to play the game before you even enter battle almost. I don't know, do you guys agree with that? Like, how did you know much before you like started raising?
I mean, I didn't. I mean, I kind of felt the same. I didn't know much, but I think this is being told a lot. So there's loads of focus now. You go to Accelerate, everyone talks about the pitch, the story, and I actually think they've over-focused on it. And I was like, okay, I have to get my story, and then, you know, I started my raising, and then I was like, oh, I don't know my metrics, so I don't know this, and like I actually would sort of kind of say, you need to first, you know, you still need to have that solid ground and then put the story on top. But now it's just like everyone's just become about the story, and it works. I mean, people do raise on that. They're not going to deny it. And maybe this is part of the female tax as such that doesn't work for us. I don't think that's enough. It may get you through the door, but ultimately it's going to shoot you in the foot in the long run if all you focus on the story. But a lot of people do, and it works to a certain extent. But I feel like every accelerator or course I've been, this like 95% of the story is now in the pitch and the story. And I'm like, well, okay, but there's still a huge, you know, in fact, they've shown that, you know, women create more sustainable, long-term, impactful businesses. Do we want to be drawing ourselves away from that? And in order to compete with our male competitors, we need to sort of forget that side of us. But we shouldn't have to do that. I mean, because that is not good overall for business.
One of the recommendations that came through from one of the Indian founders we spoke to was learn how to create a business model. because it's one of those things that you don't get taught at school, but they repeatedly, so many of the founders said, as a woman, know your metrics. Don't just rely on your male founder or your whatever. You are going to be asked about your metrics, know them inside out, and don't just think, oh, I'm not good at maths, I'm not good at metrics. You have to know it. And so that was one of the recommendations that came through right at the start. I'm just going to move us on to another one of the recommendations was around using female intuition. And Esther and I had a funny conversation about this earlier, which we will continue right here. And one of the recommendations that came from many women was this concept of using your female intuition, which can be quite a interesting topic, shall we say, controversial. And you, in a tech business, which is really head over heart, their issue was, or their point was more around listen. Just listen to that voice inside you. If it's telling you not to do something, then do it. But Esther, you had a different perspective on that. Tell us about that.
I think it's it won't help you raise venture capital. There's my there's my absolute black and white view on that. I think, but I do think founders generally are instinctive. I think that's I would look at it more as like instinct, in terms of like there is a gut feeling about if something isn't right, or if something isn't quite there, including with things like product market fit. Like when but I don't see that as like uniquely to do with female founders. I think that's just a general kind of founder instinct that you have about what you're doing, and you do have to trust that sometimes, because back to the point earlier. Actually, it doesn't matter. The business model, for us, the business model that we had ended overnight when there was a global pandemic. And so it's actually, I think it's more around the sort of the essential skills that you need. There is all of the metrics, there is all the business, not saying you don't need that, but it won't help you when there's a global pandemic that ends your business model overnight. And it's actually the ability to flip, twist, pivot, and have that kind of grit, determination, resilience. I think for me, like those are the things that are more important, because in this market, in these times, it's sort of like you might as well just rip up the manual, and sort of start again, So, and a lot of it is to do with timing. Some startups catch the wave, and then some don't. And it doesn't really. A lot of it is timing, and you can only do so much about that. So yeah, that's my view.
Georgina, have you relied on your female intuition, or would you be more with Esther?
Yeah, I probably actually a bit more with Esther. Like, I don't really think about it as, do I have female intuition or I have this? I just think I'm probably a bit more like, logic, decision-based thinking. And then I think when you're doing something, when you make that leap to go into entrepreneurship, there is always an element of you don't know what's right or wrong, and you have to just trust yourself. And you can call it intuition, and is it right? But the truth is, like, you're just taking guesses, and you have to trust yourself and go with it. And that's the most important thing, because if you don't trust yourself, then you're just going to be stuck in analysis paralysis and you won't go anywhere. You have to have confidence. And even, in fact, it's very important when you're raising that you have to go out and have confidence. The people you're speaking to don't know about your business. They don't know the details. They may not even know your industry. It really depends. And they rely a lot on you coming and showing you have confidence and you will make the decisions. And as Esther said, like, things can change overnight. So you have to have everything planned with the realization that that could go out the window, and that you're ready for that, and that you will know, okay, I've got the guts, the grit, the confidence to just be like, okay, next. And you will, make a decision, partly based on gut, partly based on the information available. And whether it's right or wrong is more going to be to do with your determination to execute it, rather than whether it really was the best decision. It
makes sense. We have only got 5 minutes left, and I'm going to throw a question that we wanted to discuss to Alex around allyship. something that came through often is the importance of having allies, particularly male allies, and that applies equally in a company like ours as it does being an entrepreneur. So, Alex, tell us about, you got any good examples of allyship? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, would I love for us to live in a world where we don't have to, lobby men to fight on our behalf? Yes, I would love to say, like, we can all be independent, we can all do this together, we don't need men to like win this battle, but that just would be a lie, and like Esther kind of mentioned earlier, like, when you're in a game like VC or in the kind of the startup world, you have to kind of work with what you've got, right? And the facts speak for themselves. This is, especially in tech, a male-dominated industry. So you need to find champions that are not only going to kind of like mentor you. A big thing that we talk about at PwC is like, it's not mentorship, it's sponsorship that we need, right? So it's not about offering someone some advice. It's about actually sponsoring them, getting them in the room, like, giving them intros, giving them opportunities. The amount of times that I've been, kind of pulled onto a panel because actually a friend of mine has just been default asked and they've gone, actually, do you know what? Alex would be way better at speaking at that subject. And they just would never have considered me because they've just default gone to the person that's in their network who happens to look like them, right? Specific examples around kind of allyship that I can, point to in my career is even, my journey with going from working as a kind of a production company founder to then being the supplier and vendor for PwC. That was purely down to the person who was in my role before, Jeremy, having a kind of, a competitive process of seeing different bids from different kind of agencies and actually saying, do you know what? I said this to him recently. I was like, what was it about my company that really stood out? And he said, you know what? I'd only really just been made aware of my biases, like, and the fact that actually it's not good enough to just be like, no, equality, I'm going to, actually you have to go out of your way to challenge your own biases. And so, paper for paper, I was as good as some of the other people. And he thought, you know what, why not give this person a go? Like, even though they might have had exposure to kind of companies at this level before, why not? And that worked out pretty well for them, I think. So, that's a great opportunity. And now I try and do that, not just with other women, but also people of color, like people from the queer community, but people with neurodiversity. Like, it's about opening up your spaces and making sure that these people feel invited and included, right? And that's how I've felt. Is it harder to be the only woman in a room full of men? Yeah, of course. But actually, if you've got a few good allies in the room as well, it won't feel as alienating. And yeah, I just think that's a huge part of the journey with female founders. Find your allies, and men out there, please sponsor, not mentor.
Nice. Well, this conversation's gone very fast and I feel like we could go on much longer, but we've got 2 minutes left. And so I promised the audience that you would give your one piece of advice to other females or any founder really, who's in the same situation, who's approaching a difficult fundraising market. So Georgina, give us your one piece of advice for anybody listening who's about to approach VCs or any other funders.
I think my advice would be start early. So yes, you need to be prepared, but actually it's building that network and building those connections. It takes time. So just getting going, even with something a little bit, not 100%, even though you may be more likely to be rejected. The point is, once you start building those connections and building that, and then they start introducing you, sometimes it's, a year later that someone says, oh yeah, I was speaking to someone and they mentioned you, and so I'm referring you to this, and it literally has taken me 1-2 years to start getting all those referrals, and then suddenly it starts happening. But it takes time. You can't just sit behind in your closed office, make everything perfect, and then think you're going to open the door and everyone's going to be there ready to listen to you. You have to build those relationships, and maybe even more. As women, we need to really get ourselves out there, have those relationships, and that would be my number one advice. Just get out there, get started. Cold calling, referrals, any way you have to.
Good advice. Esther, for you.
Think about the end. And you don't know, the ending, but it's kind of, I would have made different decisions, at a much earlier stage, in terms of like what type of funding that I took, angel versus VC, understand what VC funding really is. It's a form of debt financing. See it for what it is. With a hell of a compound interest rate on the payback. So, but the one thing I did want to say is I was having a very bad time in 2022, and a friend of mine sent me a book, which I highly recommend. I think every founder should read it, and it's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, and it's about building a business when there are no easy answers. It should be mandatory reading for every founder.
Thank you. Nice, thank you, Esther. Alex, can you finish us up?
I think be really clear on the life you want. I did a podcast like during COVID, and one of the first episodes I was speaking as a kind of tech founder at the time, but my clear message was, what do you want for your life? Because if you don't want to be on the road all the time, like having to fight for your next dollar, having to like get out there, pound the pavements, find clients, if actually what you like is the money and the idea of having $1 million in the bank, like actually there's probably a lot easier ways to get the money or to live that life, right? So be really clear on why you're doing it. That was ultimately the deciding factor for me of not raising, right? Because I was like, actually, at this time in my life, I want a lifestyle business, not to build and grow like one specific product. So be really clear what you want from it. Be really clear on the life that you're trying to achieve and the mission that you've got. And then even during the hard days, at least you'll be aligned with your values.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much, Georgina, Esther, and Alex. It's been a super interesting conversation. To anybody who's listening in still, then please do go and read the full report, which is in the comment section. But thank you all for joining us today.